Well, it's good to be with you this morning. If you didn't know, I've had the opportunity of being here for about 5.5 years, and it's been just an absolute joy to be a part of a church that places such a high value on the things of God, like stewarding resources and local giving and foreign mission trips. And the reality is that's not the case for every church across the country. We're very, very fortunate. We're very blessed to be at this place, and that's definitely not the case for those that are outside of the church. A couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to find an article that laid out 65 extravagant splurges of the filthy, rich, and famous. And as you can imagine, this article does a fantastic job of showing just how far some people are willing to go to try and buy their happiness. And so I want to share a couple of these with you. We start off with Jennifer Lopez. That's right, Jenny from the block. She spent $1,245 on a pair of overalls. These weren't gold-plated. These weren't bejeweled with precious gems. These were just overalls, like the kind you and I could get at any local Target. We progress and we see U2 frontman Bono spent $1,500 on a first-class plane ticket. Not for himself, not for a band member, but for a hat. And then he was able to get a hold of the airline and say, actually, move my hat from the seat in first class to where the pilots are. I don't want it to get crushed. All right. And then we see it gets even more ridiculous with Sean Diddy Combs. If you don't know who that is, ask your kid. He spent $3 million on his own birthday party. $30,000 of those dollars was spent on flower arrangements, and some undisclosed amount was spent on actual silver confetti. And at the top of the list, Star Wars creator George Lucas spent $100 million on a piece of property in California. Skywalker Ranch, as it's come to be known, it now comes equipped with its own fire department just in case California gets a little out of hand. And we hear this kind of spending, and we think of the overindulgence and the waste and all the good that could have been done with that money. And maybe on our best and most gracious day, we sit and we just kind of roll our eyes and like, that's just rich people being rich people. But on a less gracious day, maybe we sit and we dwell on the overindulgence and we're just disgusted by it. But there's another story that I came across. It's about the Illuminations Conference. The Illuminations Conference gathers a few hundred people representing all kinds of different Bible translation organizations. And the goal is to recast and catch vision for Bible translation projects that are current and in the future. And over the course of this conference, it happened just this year, the goal was introduced of raising $20 million for Bible translation. This is a lofty goal. There's only a few hundred people in the room. But as the pledges were counted at the end, they realized that they hadn't raised $20 million. They hadn't raised $25 million. In fact, the goal was so far exceeded that these couple hundred people in the room didn't raise $20 million or $30 million or $40 million. These people, for Bible translation, raised $80 million. Yeah, you can applaud for that. That's absolutely incredible. $80 million for Bible translation. And these two stories are incredibly different because on the one hand, the story focuses on the waste and the overindulgence and just the self-promotion and the selfishness, where the other story leaves us with a sense of wonder and amazement. This is absolutely incredible. I need to know more about this, and it focuses on the selflessness. This story is different because the heart of the matter and the object of their devotion. I don't want you to miss that this morning. Write it down if you want to, but listen to this. The difference between these two stories is the heart of the matter and the object of their devotion. In our text this morning, we're going to see the story of a woman who was absolutely extravagant in the way that she displayed her devotion to Jesus. We're going to see a woman in reading her story that has us telling her story some 2,000 years later. And we need to figure out what is it about her faith and her devotion that stands apart from so many others. What is it about her faith and devotion that stands apart from my faith and devotion? And how can my devotion look like her devotion? Our story comes in Mark chapter 14, starting in verse 1. If you have your Bibles, I'd love to invite you to turn there. And this is how it starts in verse 1. It says, "It was now 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest Jesus, and kill him. For they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people." So what we see here is in the midst of festival preparation, this time that should have been for celebration and reflection on God's goodness and faithfulness, we see not celebration on the part of the religious leaders. We see this sneaky little huddle. We see, I love the way the Bible verse captures this, and he says that they were doing this, they're looking for a way to get rid of him by stealth. We get this sense of sneaky and underhanded and don't want anyone to know. It's not out in the open, it's very private. And it wasn't for the sake of the people. It says they don't want to do it during the festival lest there be an uproar from the people, but that's not for the sake of the people. That's for their own sake. They're trying to make sure that their image is intact, that their presence as holy men that do and love the things of God is intact. Can you hear the selfishness and the self-preservation? And then very, very abruptly, the story changes from conspiracy to commit murder to a very quaint little dinner party. This dinner party, it starts off like this in verse 3. It says, "And while Jesus was at Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at a table, a woman came in with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly. And she broke the flask and poured it over his head, poured it over Jesus' head." And maybe you sit in your seat and you're thinking, this isn't really anything, but I want you to know that this was an absolutely incredibly brazen display of devotion, and that's what I want us to see. The first trait that I want us to see in this woman's faith is that our devotion needs to be brazen. It needs to be unashamed. It needs to be worn on our sleeves, affecting absolutely every area of our body, every area of our life. And this woman, this whole episode happened in the presence of men, none of which were her husband, in a house that was not her house. This happened at a private dinner party to which she was not invited. These are all big cultural no-nos. This wasn't just a problem back in the times of the Bible. This would be a problem now. If you're having a dinner party and someone kicks in your door and just begins to destroy property and then shower your guests with it, this would be a problem in 2021. But what's interesting is that this was no ordinary flask. This was no ordinary ointment. This was most likely imported from India, which is nowhere close to Bethany. This is very precious, very luxurious, very rare. And this woman, we see her do all of this in the presence of men in a house that's not her own. She's trespassing, she's destroying property, and then she takes it a step further. And she breaks this incredibly valuable, precious thing and begins to shower Jesus with the contents. This is a big deal. This was brazen. There should be no doubt in any of our minds that this woman was the center of attention. All eyes were on her, but she didn't care. All eyes were on her, and she found herself at the feet of Jesus, out in the open, saying, "This is for you. I will hold nothing back from you. I want you to have this." Unlike the religious leaders who were huddled in secret, privately, looking for a way to get rid of Jesus by stealth, this woman is out in the open. She is wearing her faith on her sleeve. She is devoting herself very simply, very plainly for all to see. Her devotion to Jesus was so real to her that it didn't just lead her to private devotion, but it affected every area of her life, and this inward faith that she had couldn't help but boil over from the surface. It had to manifest itself in some way. And this story reminds me of an episode in the life of King David where the Ark of the Covenant is being brought back to the city, and David is front and center. He is leading the charge. He is leaping and dancing, clicking his heels. He is busting a move and cutting a rug, and he is front and center. All eyes are on David. And we get a little further in the story, and we see his wife was watching this whole episode, watching and looking down on him with contempt and disgust and just, what are you doing, David? Why would you do this to yourself? Why would you do this to us? Think about our reputation. And I love David's response because he says, I wasn't doing this for you. This was never for you. He said, if you think this was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. I will become even more undignified than this. And he is just out in the open, front and center. At the end of 2015, whenever I was on my way back from Dallas Seminary, I noticed this adorable little gazebo in the middle of downtown Carrollton, and I thought to myself, that's where I'm gonna propose to my wife. That's where I'm gonna propose. That's where I'm gonna pop the question. So at this point, I had the ring, I had a location, then I began to put a plan together. And months of planning, but I finally had everything. I knew what I was gonna wear, I knew what she was gonna wear, I knew how we were gonna get there, I knew what was gonna happen. It was gonna, step by step, was gonna be perfect. And I get to this gazebo, and as I begin to lead Emily towards this place where I'm just gonna beautifully and elegantly pop the question, I knew what knee I was getting down, I had it all figured out. And I began to notice all of these other people, just like you, were just standing, carrying on with life, having conversation, taking pictures, and they're just living their best life. And I'm like, leave. I'm like, don't you know this is supposed to be a private moment between me and my wife? This is special. Get lost, strangers. And in that moment, I realized that while my preference was that our engagement would be private, it was better that I go public. Because in that moment, what I was able to do was express to Emily how much I loved her, how much I was unashamed of my love for her, how her love for me had affected every area of my life, where I didn't care about looking silly, I didn't care about looking foolish, I didn't care about people, random strangers just taking and live streaming this on Instagram. I didn't care. I was like, this is all for Emily. This was always for Emily. Would we have still gotten engaged if we hadn't proposed right then and there? Probably. But again, I was able to show her in that moment how much I truly loved her. I was able to express through action, not just inward love and say, Emily, I love you. If anything changes, I'll let you know. But actual love and devotion. And I didn't care about being uncomfortable because my love for her had affected every area of my life. And that's the reality that we see in this woman. Her love for Jesus had affected every area of her life, and she needed to be brazen. But don't misunderstand me, church. There's nothing wrong with a thriving, private, personal faith. There are so many times where that's okay and preferred. But it can't just stay inside. Your devotion for Jesus is going to affect every area of your life. It is going to affect the way you spend money. It's going to affect the way you dress. It's going to affect the way you go on vacation, the summer activities that you do. It will affect absolutely every area of your life. And it has to. It's so much more than just a Bible verse on your social media bio. It's so much more than just a Christian symbol tattoo. This isn't necessarily brazen. It's so much more than a Central Bible Church bumper sticker. That doesn't mean that you're Christian. That just means you go to a church. It has to affect every area of your life. As I've had conversations with different students and different people, I've come to realize that there are some that have such strong convictions about the way the Lord wants them to dress that they refuse to dress a certain way. They refuse to act a certain way, do certain things. And it's so beautiful and refreshing and convicting to see. When this life begins to change, it's not out of guilt, but it's out of overwhelming love for Jesus as Lord of your life. And it might lead you to stop missing church for sporting events. It might, yeah, just wait. You may go on mission trips instead of vacations. You may stop putting your kid in year-round basketball and baseball and volleyball so that they can build biblical community at church. True devotion is lived out and it affects every area of your life. A couple years ago, I had the opportunity to sit down with a worship leader at a church in Flower Mound. And he and I were talking, and he so beautifully said it this way. He said, true devotion is a life lived, not a song sung. It's not coming into a building and reading the words on a screen, but it hits you and it changes everything that you do. We know from this text, this is what we see in this. It's how your life is lived, and it's truly devoted to Jesus, and it needs to be brazen. Not only does our devotion need to be brazen, but it also needs to be sacrificial. Our devotion needs to be sacrificial. Listen to what it says starting in verse 4. It says, "There were some who said to themselves indignantly, 'Why was this ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor.' And they scolded her." Okay, now remember the scene. Remember the situation they were in. This is a woman who is breaking and entering, who is not where she's supposed to be, in front of all these men. But then we begin to actually unpack and understand a little bit about what the sacrifice is. It goes on to say that they were 300 denarii, and we'll deal with that in just a second. But I want to point out the reaction of the disciples. Look at what it says again. It says, they said to themselves indignantly, this is with furrowed brow, clenched teeth, balled fists, "Why this waste? This could have been done a million different ways. Why would you do it this way? This could have been sold for so much money and given to the poor." But this reaction is brought about by the actions of one woman doing one thing. And essentially what they're saying is that Jesus isn't worth all this. Why would you do this for Jesus? It's just Jesus. This is a little over the top, don't you think? And in some capacity, I agree with them. I think of something like that, and I think, yeah, that's pretty wasteful. It's kind of crazy. Why would you do that? And it becomes even more real when we understand the 300 denarii part. So imagine this. This is roughly a year's wage. So imagine you make $50,000. You make $50,000 and you've got bills, you've got tithe, you've got vacation, you've got clothes, you've got kids, you've got all these different expenses. All the money that you made, you spend none of it on these things. You take the $50,000 and you buy one thing. You buy one bottle of ointment, one bottle of perfume. And then not only do you buy one bottle of perfume, but you break it and you destroy it. It doesn't really do it justice in English whenever it says that she broke the flask. When I first read this story, I think you break the flask and like, okay, here's just kind of like maybe pop the top or something like that. But no, the more accurate translation from Greek is that it was absolutely and utterly destroyed. She was saving none for herself. And I don't think she really wanted to. She was trying to show Jesus that everything was his. She wanted to hold nothing back, even the most precious and luxurious item that she had. She wasn't holding it back. Jesus, you can have this. This is all I have, and I want to give it to you. Not even the most precious thing that we own is worth holding back from Jesus. So I told you about how I proposed to Emily, but before I proposed to Emily, I had the joy and blessing of working 3 jobs while I was in seminary, while I was dating Emily. And I was hourly, so that means the amount of work I did was directly related to how much money I made. And I was saving. And I say I was busting my rear, guys, I want to tell you, I was busting my rear. Just about all of my free time, going in early, staying late, 10-hour days and 14-hour days. But finally, I had enough money. I was like, I feel good about this, so I set up an appointment with a jewelry store. And as they were sitting me down, giving me the full treatment, they gave me a little jeweler's loop, and I'm looking at diamonds. I don't know what I'm looking at. It looks good to me. And then they show me a ring. I was like, I know what that is. And we began putting this ring together, and I thought to myself, this is it. This is the ring that I'm going to give to Emily. And time came to pay. And as I began to give them my money, I realized in that moment that ring was not for me. I realized in that moment that ring was never for me. In that moment, the ring was always for Emily. I bought it with my money. I had the receipt. I had the box. It could have been mine, but I bought it for the purpose of giving it away. I bought it for the purpose of making sure that Emily had this extravagant gift, and not to make her feel bad because she didn't, but I wanted her to know that I was willing to sacrifice and lay it all down for Emily. And this is what we see, that true devotion is sacrificial, because not only did I give this to Emily, but I didn't care that up to that point, I had never spent so much money on one thing, and I had never spent so much money on one thing that I didn't intend to keep. In that moment, I was ready to give it to Emily. If she was there, I would have bought it and put it on her rings. There you go. We're engaged. Yeah. But true devotion is sacrificial. And again, this is a lesson that King David had to learn the hard way in 2 Samuel 24. There is pestilence that's raging over the land, and he has to present an offering to the Lord to make it go away. And he goes to the place he needs to go, and he begins a negotiation. He says, I want to buy this land from you. And they say, no, David, I want you to have it. And David says no. And what he says is so beautiful. He says, I will not present to the Lord that which costs me nothing. He understood the sacrifice. He understood that it had to be costly. True sacrifice is always costly. Maybe it means that you don't spend all the money that you make and you develop this incredible life for yourself. Maybe it means that you delay on buying your dream car because you're maxing out your charitable giving for the year. David wasn't content giving God what he could give to anyone else. He knew it had to cost him something, and that's what we see in this text. But the difficulty is, how do we do this in 2021? Because it's so different. Sacrificial living is so different for every person, but you can know if you're living sacrificially by asking and answering these questions. Are you giving to God what you would give to anyone else? When you take time to pray, are you watching the clock and thinking to yourself, hurry up? Are you watching the clock and thinking, man, I've been praying for 5 minutes, that's good enough? Are you just trying to get through it, knowing that your day is crazy, or do you linger for a little bit, knowing that you have a lot to do, you have so much that needs to get done, but you don't want to interrupt the time with the Lord? When you tithe, is it out of obligation and legalism, or is it from a cheerful heart? You're not giving necessarily out of your abundance, but you're giving out of your little. Are you trying to fit God into your life, or are you letting your whole life revolve around God? Only you can answer these questions. And as I answer these questions, I know there's still work that needs to be done. There's things that need to be done in my life, but I'm getting there. I don't do this perfectly, and if I had to venture a guess, you don't do it perfectly either. There's always an area that we need to be more sacrificial with our devotion. And here's what's incredible. When we do this, it does get a little bit easier. It might not become second nature, but it does get easier to hold your hands open and say, God, this is all yours. I'm going to hold nothing back. Because we realize that he deserves absolutely everything that we have. He deserves all that we are. And it needs to be sacrificial. The best way for devotion to be sacrificial is when we seek and seize opportunities to be sacrificial, to make much of Jesus. So that's the next thing I want you to see. Our devotion needs to be opportunistic. Whether or not this woman planned absolutely every action or she just found out Jesus was there, she seized an opportunity to make much of Jesus. And she was holding nothing back. Listen to what it says in verse 6. This is where Jesus breaks his silence. Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them. But you will not always have me. She's done what she could. She's anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. This woman, she took an opportunity. This is where he breaks his silence, and he doesn't rush to the aid of his disciples. In fact, the exact opposite. He speaks as to defend this woman's actions. He speaks to defend and say, well done, this is beautiful. And this actually, when he says beautiful, it has nothing to do with the surface level or the superficial. When he says beautiful, the Greek word actually means it was morally and ethically good. I want you to think about that for a second. By Jesus' accounting, the beneficiary of this incredibly extravagant display of devotion, Jesus said it was morally and ethically good. It was powerful. She had to do this. She was compelled to do this. The woman in our story wasted no opportunity. We don't know if she knew she was anointing Jesus for burial, but But we know that she grabbed hold of an opportunity. And look at what it says in verse 9 again. It says, "Truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." And here we are, some 2,000 years later, still telling her story. Because her devotion was brazen, because it was sacrificial, and because it was opportunistic. When I was a freshman in college, I went in thinking that I was going to make seek and seize every opportunity I had to make much of Jesus and to live like Jesus. And I did that as much as I could. I was a part of every Disciple Now event that we had. I was a part of speaking at camps and being involved at camps. I was a part of Bible study. I started Bible studies, and I did everything I could to live and live like Jesus. When I saw someone on the side of the road, I would help them out. I'd buy them food. I'd buy them gas. And it was great. I was exhausted all the time, but I was content all the time. But it wasn't until after college, whenever I had a real job with real money and real responsibilities, that I began to let opportunities pass me by. Maybe you can relate. And a lot of it might have been maturity, but I think a large part of it was the expectations that were placed on me. As an adult who's graduated from college and beyond, we're told that we have to work really hard. We have to stay in our lane. But it didn't take me very long to sit and realize that those opportunities that God was bringing to me, they weren't just opportunities for me in the past. They were opportunities for me now. And the same is true for you. These opportunities that God presents to you, they're opportunities now. And wouldn't you know, as I'm preaching about opportunities today, I've had a couple opportunities to be very sacrificial with my display of devotion. And really the best one, as I was driving to church today, thinking about all of your faces and what am I going to say, how am I going to do this? I'm driving to church and I'm practicing and I'm rehearsing the sermon, and I see a car that is just right in the middle of East Chase and 30, and I'm thinking, you shouldn't be there. And then I see the guy, he gets out of his car and he begins to push, and I looked up and I was like, you're sneaky. And so I helped him get his car out of the road. We got it to a gas station, and I started creeping my way down to the church, and I thought, So I turned around, and I went in the gas station. I was like, what's going on, man? You have car problems? I know a little bit about cars. What can I do for you? And he's like, I just need gas. I was like, I know that. We can do that right now. So we got him to a pump, and I gave him some gas, and he stopped at just a couple dollars. He's like, how much can I do? I said, fill the tank, man. Fill the tank. And in that moment, I realized that even today, opportunities come to me whether I'm looking for them or not. I was so focused on talking to you about being opportunistic that I almost missed an opportunity to be opportunistic. But I grabbed it, and it's so good and it's so beautiful. And I got to pray with this guy. I got to talk to him about the things of God and say, hey, I go to Central Bible Church. He said, I'm going to my uncle's house. I was like, well, it's still there next week. Come on. And whatever the opportunity is, I want to grab it. I want to grab hold of it. And what if that was true for you? What if right here, right now, you committed that the answer was yes? Whatever the question God asked, the answer is yes. What if you didn't miss any opportunities? What if it was always yes? You don't know the ins and outs of every detail, but yes. You don't know how you're going to pay for a mission trip, but the answer is yes. You have a 1-year-old like I do, and you say, no, she's not going to go stay with family, but I want her to grow up on the mission field. I want her to know that we do things like this as a family. We grow, and we make much of the things of God. Maddie, will she remember? Probably not. But if we keep doing it and we keep seizing opportunities to go on mission trip, Maddie's coming with us. What if the answer was already yes? This story ends with Judas seizing an opportunity. In fact, he went out of his way to find it, and he found exactly what he was looking for. In another gospel, we know that Judas ultimately betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And we know that Judas found the opportunity he was looking for, but we also know the legacy of Judas as one of shrewdness and selfishness and deception, arguably one of the most villainous people in Scripture, betraying Jesus, sending him to the cross. And when we put the legacy of Judas up against the legacy of this incredibly brazen, sacrificial, opportunistic woman, We see that one of them is rebuked by Jesus, and we see the other one is elevated. We see that one is done away with, and we see the other one, we're still telling her story. So I'm wondering, will it be said of you that the attention of your heart and the object of your devotion is Jesus? Will it be said of you that you love the things of God? You make much of the things of God? If the answer is yes, then you need to know all of this can be summarized in this way, that there must be motion to your devotion. You can't passively surrender to the things of God. It takes action. It takes motion. It takes dedication. It's not easy, but it gets easier. There must be motion to your devotion. And with that, church, I want to pray. Invite the band back out. Lord Jesus, I thank you for the opportunities that you present to us. I thank you for the opportunity that you've given me to stand before this congregation and speak your word. I ask that anything that I said would just be forgotten and done away with, and I ask that everything that is from you would be elevated and placed on the hearts and minds of those in this room and the families that they represent. Would you be glorified? Would you be magnified? Would you continue to give us opportunities to make much of who you are, even when they're inconvenient, even when they don't fit in our schedule? Would you give us opportunities, and would you allow us to say yes whenever they show up? Yes to opening up our home. Yes to paying for the food of someone behind us. Yes to praying for our waiter. Would you give us opportunities to say yes? We pray this in your name, Jesus, the power of your Spirit. Amen.